I came to Thornley Court to answer one question, and I had decided, before I ever crossed its threshold, that I would answer it honestly even if the honesty ruined me. The question was simple. I had asked it of myself in the dark for 3 years, and I had never trusted the answer, because I had never been able to test it. Could a man want me when I was nothing to him? Not the daughter of an earl, not £30,000 held in trust, not a name that opened doors before I had spoken a word, just a pair of hands, and a plain face, and a temper I had never learned to soften. So when the Dowager Duchess of Thornley, who had loved my mother better than my mother's own sisters, had wrote to me with a scheme that should have appalled a woman of my birth, I wrote back the same afternoon and said yes. I would come as her maid. I would carry her shawls and mend her hems and stand at the edges of rooms where I was not seen. And I would watch her son, who had told her to her face that no woman alive could hold his attention. And I would learn whether the man behind the title was worth the truth. She had smiled, my mother's friend, when he said it. She had set down her glass and said nothing at all, because she already had me in a post-chaise on the Derby Road. The first time the Duke of Thornley looked at me, I told him he was wrong. It was the 3rd afternoon. There was a lady in his drawing-room, Miss Tarleton, in primrose silk, the front-runner of the season's parade. With a laugh she deployed like a fan. The Dowager had been bringing eligible women through Thornley for a month, the way one brings horses past a buyer, and the Duke had dismissed every one of them with a courtesy so cold it left frost on the windows. I was clearing the chocolate things. Miss Tarleton had just told him that the new fountain in the East Garden was the finest thing in Derbyshire, that it quite took the breath, that she had never seen its equal. And you, girl, the Duke did not look at me. Men of his rank rarely did. You walk past it twice a day. Is it the finest thing in Derbyshire? He expected me to agree. That is the thing about a great house, everyone in it has learned that agreement is the safest coin. No, Your Grace, I said. It leaks. The mason set the lead too shallow, and it weeps at the base, and by August it will have killed the roses planted under it. The finest thing in Derbyshire is the view from the long gallery at 6 in the morning, before anyone has thought to ruin it by describing it. The room went quiet. Miss Tarleton's fan stopped, and the Duke of Thornley looked at me. He had dark eyes, very dark, the kind that give nothing back, and they moved over my face as though he were reading a line in a language he had not expected to find in this house. He did not smile, but something behind the eyes shifted surprise, and under the surprise, for just a breath, something that looked almost like hunger. Not for me, for the plain fact of being told the truth by someone who wanted nothing from him. The roses, he said slowly. Yes, I had wondered. I curtsied and took the tray and left, and I felt his gaze on my back the whole length of the room, and I thought, there, that is the question, sitting up and opening its eyes. I did not yet know what it would cost either of us to answer it. He found me in the library 2 days later. I should not have been there. A maid had no business among 10,000 books, but the Dowager had given me leave to read what I liked when my work was done. And her son's house held the only thing I had truly missed in 3 years of grieving my father and guarding my fortune from men like Mr. Reedham, the freedom to sit alone with a book and be no one's prize. I had a green-bound volume of Donne open on my knee in the window seat when the door opened and the Duke came in, and there was no time to hide it, and no point. That is mine, he said. It was on the shelf, Your Grace. I mean, it is the one I read. He came closer. The light from the window caught the back of his right hand, and I saw the scar there for the first time, a long, puckered burn, pale against the brown, the kind of mark a man does not get behind a desk. No one else in this house opens Donne. I had begun to think he was mine alone. He tilted his head. What do you make of him? I should have said something soft. I had a part to play, and the part was a maid, and maids do not lecture dukes on poetry. But he was looking at me the way he had looked at me over the chocolate things, as though my answer were the only interesting thing in the county, and I found I could not lie to a man who looked at me like that. I think he is a coward, I said. The Duke's brows, he spends a whole poem dressing his love in arguments, I went on, as though if he is only clever enough she will not notice he is afraid. He hides himself inside the cleverness. He would rather she fell in love with the disguise than risk her seeing the man and turning away. I closed the book. It is the most honest, dishonest thing I have. He conceals himself because he cannot bear to be wanted for the wrong reason. So he is never wanted at all. The Duke was very still. I had said too much. I had said it about him, and I had said it about myself, and from the look on his face he had felt both edges of it go in. You describe him, he said quietly, as though you knew him. I have met men like him, Your Grace. And did they ever stop hiding? One did not, I said. I left before I could find out whether the other would. He sat down. A duke, in a chair across from his mother's maid, in the failing light, with a book of poems between us, when one word of this in the wrong ear would have cost me my place and him a fortnight of gossip. He knew it. I watched him know it, watched the awareness cross his face, and watched him stay anyway. I am told I do not stop, he said. Hiding, my mother says it to me at least once a week. Your mother is rarely wrong. No, he almost smiled. She is not. He looked at the scar on his hand, then at me. What is your name? Annie, Your Grace. It was not my name. It sat in my mouth like a stone every time I said it to him after that, and I said it, and it never stopped tasting like the lie it was. After that, he sought me out. Not improperly, he was too careful of me for that. Careful in a way that undid me more than carelessness would have. He would find a reason to be where I was. The library. The long gallery at 6 in the morning, where I had told him the finest thing in Derbyshire lived, and where I found him one dawn standing at the window, with his hands behind his back, having clearly come to see whether I had told the truth about that too. We talked. God help me, we talked the way I had never talked to the men who had courted Lady Eleanor Hartley and her £30,000. One dawn in the gallery, when the light was still grey and the house had not yet woken, he told me about the fire. There was a fire in the stables, he said, the year I turned 20. The head groom's boy was inside, 6 years old, asleep in the loft. The grooms stood in the yard and would not go in. They were frightened, and I cannot blame them, the roof was already burning. He turned the scarred hand over and looked at it, almost with surprise, as though it belonged to someone else. So I went in. I came out with the boy, and this. He flexed the fingers. My father was waiting in the yard. Do you know the first thing he said to me? No, Your Grace. He said, a duke does not crawl through fire for a stableman's brat. You might have died, and for what a child anyone could replace? The flatness in his voice had cost him something to manufacture. I was holding the boy. He was still breathing. And my father was angry that I had spent myself on something that, by his accounting, was worth nothing. He looked at me. He spent my whole boyhood teaching me what was worth something and what was not. Land, name, the opinion of men who mattered. And he was so very thorough that by the time he died I could not tell any more whether I valued a thing because it was good or only because it was dear. I should have said something a maid would say. Instead, I said, and the boy? The question seemed to undo him more than sympathy would have. James, he said. He is 18 now. He has charge of the carriage horses. He married last spring and swears he will name his first son for me, which I think would horrify my father more than the fire did." He almost smiled, and then the smile failed, and he said quietly, "You are the first person in 11 years to ask after the boy, and not the scar. Everyone wants to know how I came by it. No one has ever once asked whether the child lived." I had to look out the window then, because my eyes had filled, and Lady Eleanor Hartley did not weep in front of dukes, and neither, it turned out, did Annie. But I understood, in that grey gallery, that I had stopped testing him some days before and had simply begun to love him, and that the two things had quietly changed places without telling me. His voice changed on the word father every time, and I understood the man a little better with each telling, and I liked the understanding more than was safe. I told him almost nothing true, and everything that mattered. That frightened me most of all, that I could keep the facts of my life behind my teeth and still hand him the whole of myself in the way I argued, the way I laughed, the way I refused to flatter him. He was not falling in love with Lady Eleanor. He did not know she existed. He was falling in love with the only true thing I had ever given a man, and the cruelty of it was that I had hidden it inside a false name to make sure. Miss Tarleton noticed before he did. She was cleverer than her primrose silk. She had come to Thornleigh certain the match was hers. Her father, I would learn, had borrowed against the expectation of it, and she watched the Duke the way a creditor watches a debtor's door. She saw where his eyes went. And one evening, when the house had filled with guests for a dinner the Dowager could not avoid hosting, Miss Tarleton made her first move. I was carrying a ewer along the upper corridor when she stepped out of the shadows by the gallery with 2 other ladies in tow. And she said, loud enough to carry, "There she is. The reading maid. Your Grace was just speaking of you." The Duke had come up behind them. "He says you have opinions on poetry. Recite us something. Go on, or do you only perform for an audience of 1, behind closed library doors?" It was beautifully done. In one sentence, she had put me and the Duke alone in a room and let the other women hear the door close. A maid's reputation is a small thing, but a Duke caught with one is not, and the silence that followed had teeth in it. I might have stammered. A real Annie would have. But I had spent 20 years at tables where ruin was passed around with the salt, and I knew that the only answer to a public knife is to take it by the blade. "I have opinions on a great many things, miss," I said. "Just now I have an opinion that the gallery is cold and the ladies will take a chill, and that His Grace's guests are better served by a warm drawing-room than by a servant's recitations. Shall I send up the fires?" I curtsied to the company, and not to her, and I walked on. And I heard the Duke say, in a voice I had not heard him use before flat ducal final Miss Tarleton, "My household is not your theatre." The Dowager smoothed it over at dinner with the ease of 30 years' practice. But Miss Tarleton had learned what she came to learn. The Duke would defend a maid in front of his guests. That told her everything, and it told her she was losing, and a woman with her father's debts behind her does not lose quietly. I should have left then. I had most of my answer, but I had begun to want the rest of it more than I wanted to be safe, and that wanting was about to cost me everything I had come to protect. He came to me on the night of the harvest moon, in the disused music room where I had gone to be alone. No one used that room. The pianoforte sat under holland covers, and the hearth had not been lit in years, and I had taken to going there when the house slept, to stop pretending for an hour. He found me by the cold grate with a single candle, and he did not pretend either. "I have done something I should not have," he said. He stood in the doorway as though the threshold were a thing he could not cross without permission. "I have told my mother that I will not marry the woman she has chosen." The candle flame bent. My heart went very strange in my chest, because I knew I alone in all the world knew exactly what he was refusing. "She has chosen someone then," I said carefully. "She has had someone in mind for weeks. She will not name her. She keeps saying I will know her when I see her." He laughed, low and without humor. I told her there is no woman in England I wish to see, and then I came down to the library, and there was a maid reading my Don, telling me I was a coward. He crossed the room then. He crossed it. I am 32 years old. I have spent 11 of those years making certain no one could reach me, because the last woman who tried wanted the duchy and would have taken me with it as one takes a house with bad plumbing. And I do not even know your true self, I think. You keep something back. But I would rather have the part of you that you give freely than the whole of any woman who would give me everything to get the title. He was a breath away. I could see the pulse in his throat. If I had lifted my hand, it would have touched his face, and his eyes had gone from giving nothing to giving everything, and the whole room held its breath with us. "I should be ashamed of this," he said. "A man of my rank, in a cold room at midnight, with a woman I cannot place at a table or name to my friends. I have lectured younger men for less. I know precisely what it would do to you if the wrong person opened that door. I have lain awake counting the ways it could ruin you." His jaw worked. "And I cannot make myself stop wanting it. That is what frightens me, Annie. Not that I want you. That I have stopped being able to talk myself out of it." "Then don't," I said, before I could weigh the word. "Tell me to stop," he said, "and I will never speak of it again." I did not tell him to stop. I am not proud of the silence, but I am not ashamed of it either. We stood on the edge of it, the candle guttering, his hand rising toward my cheek, and the door opened, and Mrs. Boyd, the housekeeper, said, "Annie, Her Grace is asking for you." And the world rushed back in like cold water, and he stepped away. And I went. But I had my answer now. All of it. The man behind the title was worth the truth. The trouble was that I had built the truth into a shape that could not simply be spoken. I could not knock on his study door and say, "Your maid is Lady Eleanor Hartley, the bride your mother chose, who came to test you and has decided you have passed." There was no version of those words that did not make a fool of his trust. I had set the stage too well. The only way out was through. I went to the dowager the next morning and told her it was time. What I did not know, what neither of us knew, was that Miss Tarleton had already made her second move. The Duke chose me before the house, 2 days later, and he did it without knowing who I was, which is the only reason I will love him until I die. The dowager had assembled the household and her guests in the great saloon to announce, at last, the bride she had chosen for her son. It was the proper form. The family, the principal guests, the senior servants ranged at the back. I stood among the servants in my grey gown, my heart going like a hammer, because I knew that within the hour the woman in the grey gown and the bride the dowager would name were going to turn out to be the same person, and I did not know how the Duke would bear. He spoke before his mother could. He stepped forward in front of all of them and he said, "Before you name anyone, Mother, I must say something, and I would rather say it in front of witnesses so that no one mistakes me." His voice did not shake. "I will not marry a stranger of your choosing. There is a woman in this house who has never once lied to flatter me, who told me my fountain leaked and my favorite poet was a coward, and that I had spent my life hiding. She has no fortune and no name that matters to any of you. She carries shawls and men's hymns. And I intend to marry her, and I will hear no argument, and any man who thinks the worse of me for it may say so to my face." The saloon erupted. A marchioness near the front said well, in a voice like a slammed lid. Somewhere a gentleman laughed in pure disbelief. A chair scraped as someone half rose to leave and thought better of it. I stood frozen at the back, undone, watching a duke set fire to his own consequence for a maid named Annie who did not exist. He did not flinch from any of it. He stood with his scarred hand open at his side, and let the noise break over him, like a man who had decided, at long last, that the opinion of every person in the room weighed less than 1 honest hour in a cold music room. The dowager had her hand pressed to her mouth, and over the top of it her eyes were bright, and I understood that my mother's dearest friend was about to weep with joy in front of 40 people. And then Miss Tarleton stood up. "How fortunate," she said, "that your Grace has declared yourself before the constable arrives." The room hushed. "I'm afraid there has been a theft. His Grace's own copy of Don Green binding, quite distinctive, worth several pounds, was discovered this morning in the maid Annie's quarters, beneath her mattress, along with a silver candlestick from the music room." She turned to the Duke with exquisite sorrow. "I did not wish to be the one to tell you. A man in love is so easily made a fool of. The girl is a thief. Your Grace, I have sent for the magistrate. Stealing from a peer is a transportable offence and, depending on the value, a hanging one." I felt the floor tilt. It was the book. She had taken the book, my book, the Duke's book, the book I had been reading openly for weeks with the dowager's leave, and she had turned the dearest thing between us into the rope to hang me. And it would work. A maid found with a duke's property under her mattress goes to the assizes. Her word is nothing against a baronet's daughters, and by the time anyone untangled it, Annie would be on a transport ship, and Lady Eleanor Hartley would have vanished into a scandal that swallowed the dowager and the duke along with her. For one cold breath I was Annie, again truly Annie, a girl with no name and no friends in the room, and a rope being measured for her throat by a woman in primrose silk. That is the thing no one tells you about a disguise. Wear it long enough, and the world will treat you exactly as the costume deserves, and the law does not pause to ask whether the maid in the dock was born a lady. I had built a trap for the Duke's heart, and walked into a far worse one myself, and I understood, standing there, that the protection of my name was a thing I had thrown away the moment I pinned on the cap, and that I would have to pick it up again in front of 40 people, or hang for the want of it. The Duke had gone white. He turned toward me toward the back of the room, toward the grey gown, and I saw him begin to gather himself to fight for a maid against a magistrate. Knowing he would lose, prepared to lose anyway, I did not let him. I had come to Thornleigh to answer one question, and the answer was yes, and there is a moment when the test you have set for someone else becomes the test you must pass yourself. I stepped forward out of the ranks of servants, and I unpinned the plain cap from my hair and let it fall, and I spoke in the voice I had been born to, and had not used in 3 years, the voice that fills a room without being raised. "The magistrate will be very interested," I said, "to learn that the book was lent, not stolen. I have read it openly in the library every evening this month, with Her Grace's leave, in front of Mrs. Boyd and half the upper servants. As for the candlestick discovered so conveniently beside it, I looked at Miss Tarleton. I should be careful, Miss, about claiming to know what lay beneath a maid's mattress this morning. It rather suggests you knew where to look." Miss Tarleton's face changed. The room felt it change. "Who," she began, "do you think you are to?" "A maid," I said. "You were entirely right about that part. For a month I have been a maid in this house, and do you know what a maid learns that a baronet's daughter never troubles to? She learns the order the rooms are cleaned in. The music room is done last, after the family has gone down to breakfast by 2 girls together, never one, never before 9. So I should very much like to hear how a candlestick left that room and travelled to my quarters and arrived under my mattress before the household had risen, unless it was carried there by someone who does not keep a servant's hours, someone who rose early, Someone who knew there would be no maid in the music room yet to see her go in. I let the room do the arithmetic. "Shall I go on, miss? Or have you remembered where you were at 6:30 this morning?" "Who?" she began again, and faltered, because there was nowhere for the sentence to go. "I am Eleanor Hartley," I said, "daughter of the late Earl of Stanmore. I am the woman her Grace chose. I have been in this house a month, in this gown, by my own design and her consent, because I had grown so tired of men who wanted my £30,000 that I resolved never again to be chosen for anything but myself. I turned from her, because she had ceased to matter, and I faced the Duke. Your Grace knew none of it. He chose a maid with empty hands in front of all of you, at the cost of his own name. He passed a test he did not know he was sitting. The only thief in this room is the woman who tried to send me to the gallows because her father's creditors are at his door, and she gambled his solvency on becoming your Duchess. It was true. I had it from the Dowager, who had it from her solicitor, who knew everything in 3 counties. Sir Henry Tarleton was ruined in all but name, and the whole desperate parade of the last month had been a baronet's last throw of the dice. The room understood it all at once, the way rooms do, and Miss Tarleton's careful sorrow curdled into something naked and frightened, and she sat down because her legs would not hold her. I had executed it myself. The Duke had not lifted a finger. He had only stood there, in front of everyone, and watched a maid become a lady, and a lady dismantle the woman who would have destroyed her, and I will remember the look on his face for the rest of my life, not shock, in the end, but a kind of terrible, dawning relief, as though a door he had nailed shut at 21 had blown open in the wind. The magistrate, when he came, took one look at the assembled testimony and Miss Tarleton's collapse, and declined to trouble Lady Eleanor Hartley any further. The Duke came to me in the long gallery at 6 the next morning, where the finest thing in Derbyshire lived. He had not slept. I could see it. He stood at the window with the grey dawn on his face, and the scarred hand braced on the sill, and when he turned to me he began, "Eleanor, Lady Eleanor, I owe you an apology that I do not know how to Julian." His name. I had never said it. It landed in the cold gallery like a struck bell, and he stopped as though I had laid a hand on his chest. "Stop. I was not the one wronged here. I chose every step of this road, the gown, the name, the silence, all of it was mine. You are the one who was deceived, and you forgave it before I could even ask. So do not stand there apologizing to me." I came toward him. "Tell me what you mean to do." For a moment he only looked at me. Then something broke loose in his face. The last wall, the one he had been defending since he was a boy his father shamed for saving a servant's child. "I mean to marry you," he said, "not because you are Stanmore's daughter, not because of £30,000 I did not know existed and do not want. I mean to marry the woman who told me my fountain leaks." His voice roughened. "I have spent 11 years certain that to be wanted was to be robbed, and then a maid with ink on her fingers told me I was a coward, and I have not had a single honest hour of peace since, and I do not want peace. I want you. I want to be seen by you, and chosen anyway. That is the whole of it. That is everything I have. I had wanted, once, only to know whether a man could want me when I was nothing. I had got my answer days ago, in a public room, from a man who set his name on fire for an empty-handed girl. This was something else. This was the man I had tested, choosing to be known. "Then you should know," I said, "that I knew you the entire time. I knew exactly who you were when I came. I let you fall for a stranger to find out whether the stranger was enough." My voice was not steady now. It was unforgivable. "And you have forgiven it. So I think the only honest thing left for me to do is to stop hiding inside the cleverness. I love you. not the duchy. You, the man who went into the fire. He kissed me then, in the gallery, in the light I had promised him no one could ruin. And he was right, that it could not have happened any sooner, not before he chose. Not before I stopped, and it could not have waited a moment longer. We were married at Thornley in the autumn, in the small church on the estate, rather than the grand affair the dowager half wanted, and my £30,000 was settled by the lawyers in a way that kept it mine, because Julian insisted on it before I could ask. I will not have a single soul able to say I married you for it, he said, least of all you. A year and a half later, on a morning in spring, I sat in the long gallery at 6, with a child asleep against my shoulder and the same grey light coming up over Derbyshire, and I thought how strange it was that the finest thing in the county had turned out not to be the view after all, but the man who had got up before dawned to find out whether I had told the truth about it. Miss Tarleton I heard of only once more. Her father's creditors closed in within the year, the estate was sold, and she married a prosperous, elderly wool merchant in Leeds, who was said to be very fond of her and very deaf, which the dowager pronounced a more merciful end than she arranged for you, my dear. And let that be the whole of our charity toward her. The Green Don sits on the shelf in our library now, the one we share. Julian had it rebound in the spring and wrote on the flyleaf, in his hard upright hand, "You were right." He was a coward. We were braver. I take it down sometimes, when the house is quiet and the child is sleeping, and I read the poems again, the man dressing his love in arguments, hiding inside his own cleverness, because he could not bear to be wanted for the wrong reason. I do not think him a coward any more. I think he simply never found the one person who would tell him the truth and stay. I did. I told him his fountain leaked. And I stayed.